Welcome to the sixth and final week of our exploration of the 12 powers within us. Of course, I think there are many more than 12, but we'll work with these 12 powers, which are represented by the disciples of Jesus. And they are located in various centers of our body. And for the last several weeks, we've been noticing where they are, what they are, and what their associated colors are. So very briefly, we started the week, in week 1, with faith and strength. Faith represented by Peter, the Apostle Peter, the rock on which Jesus said he would build his church. And faith is located right in the middle of our brain, like through here, right in the middle. In that place which is sort of where our deeply held beliefs are stored, where our artistic side and our analytical side actually kind of meet, if you will. And it's represented by this color of deep blue. And I think of it in terms of the color of the sky just before the dawn. And I'm reminded of the poem by Tagore, or the saying by the poet Tagore, which says, "Faith is the birds singing before the sun." That deep color blue that's just before the dawn is such a lovely color that you can't even really put a description to. And that's the color that is in my mind when I think of faith. And then we spoke about strength. And strength is located in our spine. And it is represented by the color light green. I think of a twig that is not yet fully formed and still has flexibility, or a flower stem that has flexibility and strength. And how when we pair faith and strength together, we can know when to bend and when to stand firm. And how we, each one of us, have that ability, those two abilities within us. And then we looked at the powers of release and life, represented in our bodies, in our abdomens, a place where we not only get rid of our bodily waste, but the place where we generate new life. And the colors are represented by russet red, kind of brown, the color of mud, and bright red, the color of blood, new life. And we looked at the idea of, if we make room by getting rid and releasing, then it makes room for new life. And that is something that we can do in various parts of our lives, both physically and in our emotional and mental lives. And then we looked at the powers of order and excitement. Order being olive green, the color of the file folders, the ability to organize, which when we harness that and pair it with our excitement, moves us so that our excitement, the things that we are excited about, could actually come to fruition and end up being brought to life. And then we looked at wisdom and love, and I always joke about those two because we've all been teenagers and we know what love without wisdom might look like. And sometimes it's not just teenagers, but that's a whole different talk. Wisdom represented by the color yellow, bright yellow, the color of sunlight, color of Solomon, Sol being sun. When we spread light because we understand something and get it And then we looked at the color of love, pink, represented in our heart. And then week 5, we looked at our ability to speak and the power of our words. The power of power. And that color is represented by purple, and it is located in our throat, at the back of our tongue. And we explored how that power can be matched and paired with our power to imagine, which is located right here, between our 2 physical eyes. And that power is represented by the color sky blue, and I think of sky's the limit, like light blue, imagination. And power is represented by the color purple, the color of royalty, because it is with our power that we make things happen. With our word, we make things happen. And so we've journeyed across our body, and as I'm speaking to you, I'm pointing to the various parts of our body. And today, now, I look at understanding, which is sort of here at the top of the temple. The place when you're trying to concentrate to get something, you get those creases that seem to get more pronounced as the years go by. And will, which is, I find interestingly, is at the top of our skull. And what I find most interesting is that understanding is represented by the color gold. Now, I don't know if you've been noticing, but all the other colors that I've spoken about have been non-metallic. We didn't say sapphire blue and emerald green and ruby red. We've just said red, blue, sky blue, so on. But understanding and will are represented by gold and silver. And I find that curious because I think it points to the importance of these final 2 powers that we have. Because I really think in some ways everything can stem from them. Understanding is our power to comprehend, our power to realize, and our power to gain insight. Comprehension seems to make sense if we ever think back to English classes at school. We used to have comprehension tests. Remember those where you'd have to read something and then they would ask you questions about the story, and it was to see whether or not you could understand the facts, understand the story. And that's what comprehension is. It's the ability to make sense of facts. This happened, and what does it mean? Even if sometimes they don't make sense. For example, think back to 400 and something years ago when it was thought that the Earth was the center of our solar system. And it was questioning people. I would go into names, but I'll mess them up. But Kepler and Galileo and Copernicus, all in different orders, I'm sure, and Walt would correct me on that. Not today. That's nice. But they would look at the patterns of these stars, and then these stars that seemed to move, and realize that what they thought they knew didn't match. And so there was this questioning. And as a result of the questioning, they started to make a different sense of the facts, and the puzzle pieces fit together in a more intelligent way. And what's true about comprehension is that sometimes it can feel like work. Like, I am the thinker. And for some people, that can be really challenging. And yet, we all have the ability to make sense of our world, of what's going on around us, at least when we look at the patterns in our life and what is happening. So it's our ability to see something and make sense of it, of the facts. That's on the outer level, on the intellectual level. On the inner level, looking at comprehension means looking within and being willing to look at our life and to see the patterns that we have in our life. And they often talk about this as being work, because it can be quite uncomfortable. It is never fatal, but it is often uncomfortable. To look at the patterns of what we have done and how we live our life, and to be open to a different way of putting our puzzle pieces together. And as I said, quite often we call that, we are doing our own personal work. And I would encourage us to use that word work with more of a curiosity than a chore, because it's actually exciting when we can do it. Think of it as play. So that's comprehension, the ability to put those puzzle pieces together, whether they're out there or whether they're the puzzle pieces within us. And then we think of another aspect of understanding, and that is the ability to realize. So once we've comprehended something, then sometimes it's a slow awakening of, oh, I get it. And sometimes it's an aha, I get it. This is what's going on with those planets, those moving stars that we see. It's a realization that now we can actually make sense of. And it's the same thing within us, where it's like, why is it that I keep doing this thing that I always promise myself I'm not going to do? And so that's the realization part. It's this awareness that suddenly happens. And quite often what happens is we realize that we've been working, and now all of a sudden something is easy. So where comprehension can be like, oh my gosh, this is so much work. Realization is the, oh, it's easier than I thought. I get it. And we've all hopefully experienced that, where we've gone, I'll never get it, I'll never get it. Oh my God, now I understand it. And the relief that comes from that and the excitement that comes from that is really powerful. And then from that, the third aspect of understanding, which is the ability to gain insight. So it's all kind of related. It starts with comprehension, then it moves to this awareness, and then we have this insight where we can now look at something with more compassion. The behavior that we had that we never understood why we did it, now we've got a little bit of clarity, and we can now be kinder to ourselves when we engage in the same routine behavior that we really don't want to. And the same thing is true for the people around us, that we can see beneath what is going on to a deeper wisdom, to a different level of compassion. And sometimes this knowledge can be sort of overdeveloped. And overdeveloped wisdom can look like focusing only on the head, the rules, check, 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 check. This is what it says, this is what we need to do. And sometimes as a result, we end up focusing on doing things right instead of focusing on doing the right thing, which sometimes isn't the same thing as doing things right. I heard a story yesterday. Walt and I went down to a funeral in Seattle, and one of the people who spoke up about the gentleman who had passed away said that she liked him. And one of the reasons she liked him is because they were selling tickets to a gala do. And, they had all these things that they had to check off. They had to make sure that, people were paying the right amount of money and all this stuff. And so the person in charge of the event was giving them the rundown of all the things that they needed to do. And then that person walked away, and what Ed said to Sue, who is the person telling the story, is, okay, now I'm going to tell you what we're really going to do. And what we're really going to do is if somebody wants a ticket and they can't pay for it, they're going to get a ticket. That's the difference between doing things right and doing the right thing, leading from your heart. And so what we don't want is all head and no heart. Instead, we want heart still to be the thing that leads us, even as part of this greater understanding that intellectual wisdom is not all that there is. Underdeveloped understanding is our lack of awareness to look at ourselves. We just do our own thing and happily do our own thing, and there are times when we might be tempted to look in the mirror and see what might be going on beneath, and we choose not to. So, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not necessarily the best use of our skill to understand ourselves and grow ourselves up. And so the ideal is to understand that we can understand. And it's sometimes hard. We may have been raised with the message that you'll never amount to anything. You're not as smart as the person beside you. You're not a good reader. You're not a good writer. You're not good at math. All of those things that we may have bought into that stop us from leaning into our power to understand. The curiosity that comes from wanting to understand more. And sometimes that talk becomes so pervasive that it becomes part of our own everyday self-talk. And when we have that going on within us, there's no space to question. And so sometimes understanding can be hard until it becomes easy. So, how do we make that happen? Well, we pair understanding with our power of will. And our power of will is our power to choose, to commit, and to be willing. First step, I choose. Out of the many different choices that are available, I'm going to choose this. That is a power. The power to choose. as you know, I do weddings, perform weddings. This summer I've done 50-something weddings, and in each one they say, I choose. I choose you. I choose me to be with you. Out of the many, I choose you. Out of the many paths available to me, I choose this path. Now that we've done that, there's no more meandering needed. I don't need to waste my energy on looking at other things. No more decisions need to be made. I can now focus on what I am choosing. I choose. And then all my energy can go into that choice and watch that choice become something that I can lean into and grow and commit to. So it's not enough to choose it now. The idea is to choose and then be willing to commit to it. And sometimes that takes some work. That takes some refocusing. We step away from our path a little and then we want to get back to it. So commitment is the path that we have chosen and choosing to stay on it. And then I am willing. I am willing. This is a promise to yourself. It is a promise to someone else. But mainly, when you say, I am willing, you're saying something to yourself. And what do you want to be willing to do? Well, sometimes being willing means being willing to accept that there are things that aren't going to be the way you want them to be. I'm walking down this path, and I'm willing to stay on this path, and I've committed to this path. And once in a while, I'm going to fall off it. And willingness is being willing to get back on. Willingness is saying, yep, I strayed a little. I'm going to choose to go through that narrow gate again and get back on the path. It is helpful to know what your goal is, because that helps you to recommit. And so, do you know what your purpose is? Do you know what fills your heart and that something that is longing, that you're longing for? Do you know what that might be? Because if you know what it is, then it's easier to commit. It's easier to choose. And it's most certainly easier to get back on the path. This is what harnesses your energy, harnesses your power. I will return to my path. Remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. On Friday evening, I saw Jesus Christ Superstar, and it was amazing. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is saying, I don't want to do this. I want to get off my path. It's going to hurt. And then at some point he says, not my will, but thine. And what he's talking about there is the idea of sticking with what you know your life's purpose is. And then being willing to continue to commit to it, even when sometimes the going gets tough. There's an overarching purpose to you and your life. To you and your life. To you and your life. Be willing to stick to that purpose. And what's the best way to do that? By using your power to understand. With your power to understand, you build the skill to use your will. One of the things that I'm going to guess I'm not alone in the room about, is I understand intellectually exactly what I need to do to eat more healthily, to start a new exercise regime, to build a new meditation practice, to write the book that I've been promising myself for 10 years that I'm going to write. I know exactly what I need to do. But there's a part of me that's really not committed yet. There's a part of me that is still in that lacking of will. Can anyone identify with that? You've had something, there's a measurable, it's actually like a known thing that if people sign up for exercise programs at gyms, that within 6 months, at least 50%, I think is the number, will never step back into that gym. So understanding and will are the things that when they go together create, no different from that order and passion. It's that same idea that these powers need to work together in order for us to follow that path. And yet, one of the things that I am willing to commit to, and I will encourage you all to do the same, is to be willing to commit to the fact that sometimes I'm just not going to do it. And just imagine for a moment of the freedom that you would feel in your body if instead of, hitting yourself over the head about the fact that you wanted to do this and you didn't do it and you didn't have the willpower and I'm so weak and all of that nasty stuff that you say to each other, what if you just said, I didn't do it? And leave it at that. Or I'm not willing to do it. I know I'm supposed to eat leafy greens and kale and what if I know that and I'm not willing to do it? Doesn't that feel free? I mean, we're all laughing, but doesn't that feel freeing? So part of this will is, are you willing to accept who you are as you are? That's the biggest power, I think, that we have in will. And we see it listen to this really interesting verse in the book of Romans. It's like these two parts of ourselves, right? We've got the part of us that does the should, and then there's the part of us that does the willpower, willfulness, willingness. And sometimes they feel like they're in tension with each other. Listen to this one, because it's basically the same thing. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, even evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inmost self. Oh, let me go backwards a bit. Here we go. Sorry, go back. Romans 7, beginning at chapter 8, verse 18. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, It is no longer I that do it, but sin. That is sin is the missing the mark. So the missing of the mark that dwells within me. I see in my members, so that's my thoughts, another law at war within the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of my error thinking that dwells in my thoughts. That's a long and painful way of saying, I'll read verse 15, I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want. I do the very thing I hate. I'm like, oh, cool, that happened 2,000 years ago too. And the freedom comes when we recognize it and go, okay, this is human. So what can we do then to activate some of our will? I mean, sure, it's something that is human. So what can we do? Well, there's just a couple of things I want to share with you. And this is where understanding and will work together. It's like, okay, so how can I trick the part of me that is willing to do the stuff that I want to do and kind of let the other not be there? How do I make that happen? Well, the first thing I'm going to suggest is become aware of what I think of as high leverage actions. And by that I mean things that when you do them, it's going to lead you to go down that rabbit hole. In 12-step programs, it's like, do not take that first drink. It's do not go down the cookie aisle if you're trying to avoid cookies. Order online if you must. It's like finding the one thing that if you're trying not to watch television too much, then don't turn it on or remove it from the room. Or if you're going to promise yourself that you're going to do exercise, then find a place for those shoes to go, that you're going to trip over them. Don't put it away. Like if you want to play musical instruments, then don't have it in a cupboard. Have it somewhere where you're going to see it. Like those are the sorts of things that you can do to build your will stamina. If you want to spend less on your credit cards, don't carry them. You know, they're simple things. But they can make a big difference if you know. So that's where your understanding comes from. And then the other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that path that I spoke about is an at times path. And think of the word at times, or sometimes, if that is more comfortable for you. I will be impatient at times, and at times I will be patient. I will eat cookies, probably more times. And there will be times when I say no thank you. I will procrastinate at times. I will stick to my diet at times. And by allowing yourself the power of understanding human behavior, which is at times, your life will become more full. You'll be less scared of those things that you're wanting to do, but you're afraid to do because you don't want to commit to it too strongly, because then I'll never eat another cookie again, and that just seems like way too much to give up. And so find that at times, the power of at times. This way you take, I wrote here, you're willing to take a mess and make a message out of it. With your power to understand. You shift from the either or to the both and. With your power to have willingness and be willing to not be perfect, which is tied to I'm willing to understand that I'm not perfect. Think of the freedom. With your power to understand, build your skill to use your power of will. I bless you.